In the heart of sunny Florida, where palm trees sway and tourists flock for a taste of paradise, a darkness crept through the cracks of everyday life. A name, once only linked to a wisecracking comic book character, took on an entirely different meaning, a name that would send shivers down the spines of an unsuspecting community. It started quietly, unnoticed by most, just another face blending into the streets, just another man moving through the world without significance. But behind closed doors, in the shadows of the ordinary, something was building. Something no one saw coming. It wasn't a moment of passion, not an act of desperation, not the kind of crime born from the chaos of an argument gone too far. No. What happened next was cold. Calculated. It carried no hesitation. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about anything that most people could understand. It was something far more unsettling. 2 women. 2 lives. Gone. Not by accident. Not by mistake. Someone had decided. Someone had chosen. And when it was over, when the last breath was stolen, there wasn't remorse. There wasn't regret. There was only a man, standing in the wreckage of what he had done, looking forward to whatever came next. This is not a story of a suspect who claimed innocence. There was no desperate denial, no weak attempt to explain it all away. This is the story of a man who wanted the world to know exactly what he had done. Who laughed in the face of justice. Who taunted, who smirked, who sat in front of the cameras and let the world see exactly who he was. No disguise. No mask. Just the raw, unsettling truth of a person who found pleasure in the unthinkable. And the question that lingers, long after the case has been closed, long after the gavel has fallen and the sentence has been passed, is why? What creates a mind like this? What makes someone cross that line, not just once, but twice, without a flicker of hesitation? What makes someone look at another human being and see nothing more than an opportunity to kill? Tonight, we go deep into the mind of Wade Wilson, a name that once belonged to a fictional antihero, now forever tied to real-life horror. A story that rattled the foundations of a quiet Florida town, a case that left even hardened detectives struggling for words. A crime so senseless, so empty of any reason, that it forces us to confront the darkest corners of human nature. If you think you know what evil looks like, you might need to think again. Because sometimes, it doesn't come with rage or a grudge or a history of violence. Sometimes, it comes with a smile. Stay with us as we uncover the twisted crimes of Wade Wilson. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this case, this story, this nightmare, is only beginning. Wade Stephen Wilson. A name that, to most, sounded familiar, like something pulled from the pages of a comic book. But there was nothing heroic about this man. Nothing fictional about what he did. No scripted plot, no special effects, no redemption arc. Just cold reality. A reality that left 2 women dead, a community shaken, and a courtroom filled with the weight of something so deeply unsettling that even those who had seen the worst struggled to find the right words. Born in Florida, Wilson wasn't a stranger to trouble. His life was marked by run-ins with the law, brushes with violence, a pattern of behavior that hinted at something darker lurking beneath the surface. He was the kind of man who left people uneasy, the kind of presence that made others shift in their seats, even if they couldn't quite explain why. There was something off. Something unpredictable. But in a place where crime is nothing new, where stories of theft, assault, and even murder flash across the news every day, he was just another name. Just another face in the system. Until the night he made sure no one would ever forget him. October 2019. The air was thick with the usual Florida heat, the streets alive with the usual noise, laughter from a nearby bar, the hum of passing cars, the distant sound of music floating through the night. Nothing about that evening stood out. No warning signs. No sense of the horror about to unfold. Christine Melton, 35 years old, had no reason to believe that inviting Wade Wilson into her home would be the last decision she ever made. No reason to fear that, in the quiet of her own space, she would be fighting for her life against a man who had already decided how the night would end. Hours later, just miles away, Diane Ruiz was going about her day. A 43-year-old mother, a bartender, someone who had spent years pouring drinks, hearing stories, meeting faces that blurred together over time. But this man, this face, would be the last one she ever saw. 2 women. 2 brutal deaths. No hesitation. No remorse. No motive that anyone could understand. Just the act itself. Just the sheer fact that Wade Wilson had killed, and then, without a moment of panic or regret, simply moved forward. The community wasn't prepared. The people who called this place home had seen crime before, had heard stories before, but not like this. This wasn't an argument turned deadly. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was different. This was a man who killed simply because he could. The fear set in quickly. The kind of fear that lingers, that keeps people looking over their shoulders, that turns a familiar town into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just the violence. It was the reason, or the lack of one. It was the fact that these women had done nothing. They weren't enemies. They weren't targets. They were just there. And that was enough. People demanded answers. They wanted to know who Wade Wilson really was. They wanted to know how a man like that could move through the world without raising alarms, how he could walk among them without anyone realizing what he was capable of. And when they found out, when the details started to surface, the truth was even worse than they had imagined. Wade Wilson didn't hide. He didn't run. He didn't try to escape what he had done. Instead, he sat before the world and smiled. Smiled as if none of it mattered. Smiled as if 2 lives hadn't been taken at his hands. Smiled as if he had done exactly what he wanted to do. And so the question remained. Was he born this way? Or did something create him? Was this a man who had always been waiting for the moment to kill, or did something push him over the edge? The answers wouldn't bring the victims back. They wouldn't erase the fear that had settled into the town. But people needed to understand. Because if they couldn't, then that meant Wade Wilson wasn't the only one out there. It meant there could be more. More faces, more names, more smiles hiding something unspeakable. The search for justice had begun. But justice doesn't erase the past. It doesn't undo what's been done. It only stands as a reminder. A reminder that evil doesn't always come in the way people expect. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it blends in. Sometimes, it looks harmless. Sometimes, it carries a name you've heard before. Wade Stephen Wilson was born on May 20, 1994, in Fort Myers, Florida, a place known for its sandy beaches, warm breezes, and tourists seeking an escape from reality. But for Wilson, reality had never been kind. His childhood wasn't filled with sunshine. It was a patchwork of instability, anger, and trouble that seemed to follow him from an early age. There was no singular moment, no clear turning point that could explain what he would one day become. Instead, it was a series of choices, a slow descent, a steady march towards something inevitable. Wilson's run-ins with the law began young. Petty crimes at first, things that might have been brushed off as the reckless behavior of a troubled kid. But they escalated. There were charges of battery, theft, and drug-related offenses. Each arrest, each mugshot, each courtroom appearance was another warning, another chance for the system to step in. But time after time, Wilson slipped through the cracks. A few months in jail here, a probation order there, nothing that seemed to change him, nothing that stopped the pattern from repeating. He wasn't just breaking laws. He was learning. Testing limits. Finding out how far he could go before someone finally stopped him. People who knew him described a man who could turn on the charm when he wanted to, who could blend in just enough to make people let their guard down. He wasn't always violent, not in the way people imagine when they think of killers. He wasn't the brooding loner in the corner, the social outcast. He was unpredictable. There were moments when he could be friendly, even likable. And then there were moments when that mask slipped, when something colder, something crueler, shone through. The people who saw those moments never forgot them. By the time he was 25, Wilson had been in and out of jail multiple times. He had been given second chances, third chances, more than most people ever get. But instead of changing, instead of stepping away from the life that had already put him behind bars, he walked straight into something worse. Christine Melton was 35 years old. A woman with a love for music, for people, for the kind of small moments that make life worth living. She had dreams, plans, things she was working toward. She wasn't famous, she wasn't rich, but she was someone who mattered. Someone who had a place in the world, a life filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the kind of friendships that last a lifetime. She had no way of knowing that inviting Wilson into her home would be the last thing she ever did. That the man she let through her door wasn't just another acquaintance, not just someone passing through. That he had already decided how the night would end. That her story was about to be cut short in a way that no one could have predicted. And then there was Diane Ruiz. A 43-year-old mother of two. A bartender who had spent years behind the counter, hearing the stories of strangers, pouring drinks for people looking to forget their problems, to celebrate, to pass the time. She knew people. She could read them. She had to, her job depended on it. But even she didn't see the danger standing in front of her. Even she didn't realize, in those last moments, that she had just crossed paths with a man who had already killed and who had no intention of stopping. Her murder sent shockwaves through the community. This wasn't just about one life taken. It was about fear, about the realization that anyone could be next. That someone like Wade Wilson could walk among them, could smile, could speak, could pretend to be just another person in the crowd, until the moment he wasn't. Wilson's biological father, Stephen Testaseca, watched as his son's name became infamous. Their relationship had never been easy. There had been distance, disagreements, struggles that stretched across years. But nothing could have prepared him for this. For the moment when he would have to face the fact that his son wasn't just troubled, wasn't just lost, he was something else entirely. Law enforcement wasted no time. Cape Coral Police Chief Anthony Sizemore and his team worked around the clock. They combed through evidence, followed every lead, pieced together the final moments of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. They weren't just looking for a suspect. They were looking for answers. For something, anything, that could explain why. But the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. There was no reason. No motive that fit into any logical framework. There was just Wade Wilson, a man who killed without hesitation, who sat in front of cameras and smirked, who seemed to enjoy the attention, the headlines, the horror he had caused. And the question that haunted everyone was simple: had this always been inside him, waiting for the right moment to surface? Or had something pushed him over the edge? The answer wouldn't change what had already happened. But people needed to know. Because if they didn't understand, then how could they ever stop it from happening again? October 7, 2019. A day that should have been like any other. A Monday that blended into the rhythm of life in Cape Coral, Florida. People went to work. Kids went to school. Bars filled with the usual crowd, locals looking to unwind, tourists searching for a taste of Florida's nightlife. No one had any reason to believe that, by the time the sun rose again, 2 women would be dead, and a man who walked among them without a second glance would be at the center of something unspeakable. Christine Melton had always loved music. It was one of the things that made her happiest, something that brought people together. That night, she found herself at a local live music bar, one of those places where the atmosphere is thick with conversation, laughter, and the steady pulse of a band playing in the background. She wasn't alone, but she wasn't in the kind of company that made her feel unsafe. Wade Wilson was there, blending into the crowd. To those around him, he was just another face in the dim lighting, another person nodding along to the music, just another man in the room. Nothing about him screamed danger. Nothing about him hinted at what he was capable of. At some point, Wilson struck up a conversation with Melton. Maybe it was casual, maybe he turned on that charm he knew how to use when he wanted to. She had no reason to think twice about him. He was just someone at the bar, just another person out on a Monday night. When the music died down and the evening started to slip into the quiet of the early morning hours, she invited him back to her home. Maybe for a drink, maybe just to continue the night's conversation. Whatever the reason, she welcomed him into her space, a decision she had no way of knowing would be her last. Inside her home, the air shifted. Whatever conversation had been flowing between them changed. The easygoing nature of the bar, the casual feel of the night, was gone. Wilson didn't just snap. It wasn't an outburst. It wasn't a moment of uncontrollable rage. It was calculated. It was intentional. His hands found her throat. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. He squeezed. Hard. Long enough for her body to give in, for the struggle to stop. No mercy, no remorse. Just the simple fact that he had decided Christine Melton wasn't going to leave that room alive. And once it was over, once the fight had drained from her body and the life had slipped from her eyes, he didn't panic. He didn't run. He simply moved forward, as if what he had just done was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But he wasn't finished. Diane Ruiz had started her day like she always did. She had places to be, things to do. She had no way of knowing that as she walked through the streets of Cape Coral, Wade Wilson had already decided that she would never make it home. Somehow, Wilson got her into Melton's car. Maybe he convinced her she needed a ride. Maybe he used the same kind of easy charm that had let him slip past so many people's defenses before. Maybe she simply didn't see the threat standing right in front of her. What happened next was pure cruelty. He strangled her. Just like he had done to Christine Melton. No hesitation, no struggle within himself. It was easy. Too easy. And then, as if that wasn't enough, as if he wanted to make sure there was no question that she would never take another breath, he dragged her out onto the pavement. He climbed into the driver's seat. And then he ran her over. Not once. Not twice. Multiple times. As if she was nothing. As if her life, her existence, meant less than the gravel beneath the tires. And then he walked away. No guilt. No fear. No attempt to hide. It was as if none of it mattered. Wade Wilson didn't rush to get out of town. He didn't try to disappear. He didn't even bother to wipe away the blood that had stained his hands. Instead, he made a phone call. Not to a friend. Not to an accomplice. Not to someone who could help him cover his tracks. He called his father. Stephen Testaseca answered, unaware that his son's voice on the other end of the line carried something far worse than any trouble he had gotten into before. Wilson didn't hold back. He didn't sugarcoat what he had done. He told his father, in detail, about the women he had killed. He admitted everything. As if it was just another story. As if he was talking about something that had happened to someone else. Testaseca, shaken, did what any rational person would do. He called the police. But by the time law enforcement arrived, Wilson was already gone. Not far, not hiding, but just beyond their reach for the moment. The hunt for a killer had begun. And the people of Cape Coral were left to ask themselves the same question that would haunt them long after Wilson was caught. Why? What drove him to do this? And, perhaps more terrifyingly, had he ever intended to stop? The call from Stephen Testaseca to the police was the turning point. It was the moment the story broke open, the moment Wade Wilson stopped being just another man walking the streets of Cape Coral and became the subject of an intense manhunt. Wilson had confessed everything to his father, not in hushed tones, not with any hint of regret, just a flat, matter-of-fact recounting of the two women he had killed. There was no hesitation in Testaseca's response. He did what he knew had to be done. He reported his own son to the authorities. The urgency in his voice was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a vague warning or a suspicion, this was a direct statement from a man who had just been told, in detail, about two brutal murders. Cape Coral police wasted no time. Within hours, an official search for Wade Wilson was underway. They weren't just looking for a suspect. They were looking for a man who had already proven he was capable of killing without hesitation and who had made it clear he had no intention of stopping. It didn't take long to track him down. Less than 24 hours after his father's call, on October 8, 2019, Wilson was taken into custody. He didn't resist. He didn't run. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if being caught was just another step in a path he had already accepted. With Wilson in custody, the investigation moved quickly. The crime scenes told their own stories. Forensic teams combed through Christine Melton's home, through the car Wilson had used to lure Diane Ruiz to her death, through the evidence he had left behind with a carelessness that suggested he never expected to get away with it. In Melton's home, investigators found clear signs of a struggle, proof of the violence that had taken place within those walls. Her body, left in the very place she had once felt safe, bore the marks of strangulation. The bruising, the damage to her throat, it was all unmistakable. Then there was Diane Ruiz. The brutality of her murder had left behind more than just a story to be told in court. The forensic evidence was undeniable. The damage from being strangled. The horrifying impact from being run over multiple times. The sheer level of overkill, the absolute disregard for her as a human being, it was all there, laid out in the reports, in the photographs, in the silent, inescapable truth of the evidence. Wilson had left his mark everywhere. Fingerprints. DNA. Surveillance footage that placed him at key locations before and after the murders. The case against him was airtight. There was no mystery left to solve. No doubt about who had committed these crimes. The only thing left was to hear Wilson himself speak, to hear, in his own words, what had driven him to do what he had done. When the interrogations began, the expectation might have been that Wilson would show some kind of remorse, some flicker of regret, some attempt to explain himself. But what unfolded in that interrogation room was something else entirely. Wilson didn't deny what he had done. He didn't try to shift blame, didn't make excuses, didn't plead innocence. He spoke about the murders with a detachment that sent a chill through the detectives in the room. He described strangling Christine Melton as if he were recounting a mundane event, a moment in time that carried no weight for him. Then, he spoke about Diane Ruiz. He admitted to strangling her. He admitted to running her over. And when asked why he had done something so gruesome, why he had gone beyond the point of killing and into something even more disturbing, his answer was simple. Because he wanted to. There was no elaborate justification, no attempt to make sense of his own actions. He made it clear that he had enjoyed what he had done. And, worse, that he had no intention of stopping. At one point, he even told investigators that if he had been given the chance, he would have killed more people. That if they hadn't caught him when they did, there would have been more bodies, more names, more grieving families. His demeanor during the interrogations was unsettling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He seemed to relish the attention, to enjoy being at the center of something so horrific. He smirked. He joked. He spoke about murder the way someone else might talk about a hobby, something they do to pass the time. And then, there were the tattoos. When Wilson's mugshot was released to the public, the media latched onto one particular detail. The markings on his face, the tattoos that seemed to reflect something deeper about who he was. Most notably, a blackened-out circle around his eye, giving him a striking resemblance to a certain comic book character. Wade Wilson, Deadpool. It didn't take long for headlines to take shape. The Deadpool Killer. The name spread fast. It was catchy, sensational, something the media could use to grab attention. But the reality behind it was far from entertainment. This wasn't a character in a movie. This wasn't fiction. This was a man who had taken 2 lives without hesitation and who had admitted, without shame, that he would have taken more. For the people of Cape Coral, the shock was overwhelming. This was their community, their home. These were women who had lived among them, who had been part of their world. The idea that someone like Wade Wilson had been walking their streets, sitting in their bars, blending in, waiting, it was a thought that haunted them. News stations ran constant updates. People wanted answers. How had this happened? Why had he been free to do this after so many previous arrests? Could anything have stopped him? But the truth was simple. Wade Wilson had killed because he wanted to. And nothing would have stopped him unless someone put him away for good. The trial of Wade Wilson was not just about presenting evidence, it was about exposing the depth of his crimes in a courtroom where every word carried the weight of lives lost. From the moment he stepped into the courtroom, shackled and wearing a red jumpsuit, there was no question about who he was or what he had done. The prosecution had built a case so airtight that the trial itself felt less like a question of guilt and more like a formality, a process that needed to be followed before the inevitable sentence was handed down. The evidence spoke louder than anything else. The prosecution laid it out methodically, piece by piece, ensuring that every juror understood the sheer brutality of the acts committed. The forensic reports, the autopsy findings, the surveillance footage, the crime scene photos, all of it was shown in stark detail. There was no way to soften what had happened to Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. There was no room for doubt. Wilson's DNA was on both victims. His fingerprints were found in all the places they shouldn't have been. The text messages he had sent before and after the murders painted a chilling picture of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Then, there was the confession. Wilson's own words, spoken without an ounce of regret, played back for the courtroom to hear. His laughter during interrogations. His casual admission that he would have killed again if given the chance. His complete and utter lack of remorse. It was all there, undeniable, impossible to ignore. The prosecution didn't need to convince anyone that Wilson was a killer. He had already done that himself. But the defense still had a job to do. They had to argue for something less than the death penalty, had to present some kind of explanation for Wilson's actions, even if none could truly justify them. They leaned into his history, his childhood, the abuse, the neglect. They spoke about his long battle with drug addiction, his mental health struggles, the way his life had unraveled in the years leading up to the murders. They brought in experts who testified about his past, about the way substance abuse could warp a person's sense of reality, about the way untreated mental illness could lead to violent impulses. But none of it mattered. The jury listened, but there was no sympathy to be found. The facts were too overwhelming. The horror of what had been done was too great. When it was time to deliberate, it didn't take long. The jury came back with a recommendation that left no room for debate. Wade Wilson deserved the ultimate punishment. The death penalty. And Judge Nicholas Thompson agreed. When Wilson stood before him for sentencing, there was no hesitation in the judge's voice. He spoke of the heinous nature of the crimes, of the suffering inflicted not just on the victims but on their families, on the entire community. He made it clear that Wilson had forfeited his right to live. There was no mitigating factor strong enough to outweigh the horror of what had been done. As the sentence was read, Wilson didn't react. No anger, no fear, no remorse. He had known this was coming. In a way, he had invited it. There was no apology, no final plea for mercy. He stood there, silent, as the weight of his crimes settled over the courtroom. The families of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz sat in the gallery, watching, waiting. Some wept, others simply sat frozen, listening to the words they had hoped to hear. It would never bring back the ones they had lost. It would never erase the pain. But it was something. Justice. Or at least, the closest thing to it. The weight of the crimes did not end with the trial. The echoes of what happened stretched far beyond the courtroom, leaving behind a community scarred, families broken, and a sense of loss that time would never fully heal. For those who loved Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz, justice was served, but justice does not bring back the dead. It does not erase the last moments of terror they endured. It does not fill the empty spaces at dinner tables, the silence left behind in homes that were once filled with laughter, the birthdays that will come and go without them. Christine Melton's family, once whole, was now fractured. Her absence was a void that could never be filled. A woman who had been full of life, whose laughter had once brightened the room she entered, was gone in a way too cruel to comprehend. Her friends still spoke of her as if she might walk through the door at any moment, still clung to the memories that now felt like a different lifetime. There was no making sense of it, no way to understand why someone like her had to suffer at the hands of a man she had only just met. For Diane Ruiz's children, life would never be the same. Their mother, the woman who had been their protector, their source of warmth and comfort, had been taken from them in a way so violent that it defied reason. The grief was not just sadness, it was anger, confusion, a question that could never truly be answered: why? Why her? Why did she have to cross paths with someone who saw human life as disposable? The community of Cape Coral did not forget. The name Wade Wilson became one spoken in hushed tones, a reminder of the horror that had unfolded in their own backyard. Parents warned their children to be careful, to trust no one, to understand that monsters did not only exist in movies. They lived among them. They walked the same streets, sat in the same bars, blended into the crowd until it was too late. But beyond the pain, beyond the immediate horror of what he had done, there were deeper questions. Questions about how someone like Wade Wilson came to be. Was he always this way? Was there ever a moment, long before the crimes, where his life could have taken a different path? Did the system fail him? Did society? Or was there nothing that could have stopped him? His history of mental health struggles and drug abuse was brought up during the trial, but did it matter? Does addiction create a killer? Does childhood trauma shape a murderer? Or are some people simply born without the ability to care, without the capacity for remorse? And then, there is the question no one wants to ask: could it have been prevented? Were there signs before he took those lives? Did someone see something, suspect something, and say nothing? Could the right intervention at the right time have changed everything? Or was this always his path? Was there ever a choice? The justice system did what it was designed to do: identify the guilty, hold them accountable, deliver punishment. But no court ruling can undo what was done. No sentence can bring peace to those who live with the aftermath. Wade Wilson will never walk free again, but that does not change the fact that Christine and Diane are gone. And that, in the end, is the cruelest truth of all. The story of Wade Wilson is one that will not be forgotten. The pain he caused, the lives he took, the fear he left behind, these things do not fade. The justice system may have sealed his fate, but the memories of his victims live on, carried by those who loved them, mourned them, and will never stop remembering them. Their names deserve to be spoken louder than his. Their stories deserve to be told longer than his crimes. Because in the end, they are what truly matter. If this case has made you think, if it has made you question the things we assume about safety, justice, and human nature, then this is just the beginning. There are countless stories like this, cases that leave behind more questions than answers, tragedies that remind us how fragile life can be. Some have found justice, others remain open, waiting for the right clue, the right voice, the right moment to bring closure. If you want to uncover more of these stories, if you want to stay informed about the darkness that exists beneath the surface, then make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. There is always another case, another life taken too soon, another mystery that demands to be solved. And speaking of that, next time, we'll be looking at a case that shocked an entire community, a story that left behind a trail of confusion, betrayal, and unanswered questions. Stay tuned for a crime so unsettling, so unthinkable, that it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust. Thank you for watching. And now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this case? Could anything have been done differently? Let me know in the comments below, and let's continue the conversation.